I know you're thinking this is the neuron structure video and you are looking at picture of the brain and its parts, but this is just a quick review. So just label your notes down the side, A through J. The biggest answer is corpus callosum, so you shouldn't need too much space for writing. And then pause the video once you have the A through J list completed, and then you can check your answers. Alright, here are the answers to the diagram. Good review for the test. I will not ask you the location of the skull, but all of these other features, parts, are potential test questions. Alright, so we're going to pick up the neuron structure video right here with a really good picture and hopefully a good picture that shows up on your notes. That is also available online if you need to print off just this slide. It's a really good picture to study from. Things to recognize: I've put a rectangle around cell body, which is just the blue part up here to the right, and different from the axon, which would be basically everything down here. So just to recognize the two basic components of a neuron and all the other parts in between that we will be talking about. So to talk about neuron structure, there's just a couple things to recognize. On a neuron, there are these long branches called axons, these guys here, that are covered in myelin, which is protein, as the name suggests, but actually made up of a lot of lipids, actually more lipids than proteins. And so some axons, different nerves, are myelinated and some are not unmyelinated. The myelination in the central nervous system comes from the oligodendrocytes, which we talked about a long time ago, in the basically first round of the notes, when we talked about the brain parts, because these are located in the central nervous system, like the brain. Myelinated axons appear as the white matter of the brain, so here's a transverse section of the brain, and you can see on the inside is a little bit lighter colored. That's the white matter. The outside, the cerebral cortex, is of course the gray matter, and those are made of unmyelinated axons and cell bodies, also located in the gray matter. Here's another good picture, a very simplified, colored in version of a neuron, a nerve cell. Gives you just a nice picture with not a lot of extra stuff on it. Just to talk about the parts in general. And again, just to quickly go back to something we haven't talked about in a while, the central nervous system is made up of lots of different kinds of cells, those helper cells that we talked about a long time ago. The oligodendrocytes, shown here in green, are in charge of contacting possibly many different points, up to 30, 40, or 50 different locations, making these myelinated sheaths, which are surrounding and insulating the axon, which is sending an electrical signal. So just like the wiring in your house or your car, any place where there's electricity being sent, the wires are coated to insulate the wire to help prevent loss of the signal. And in the peripheral nervous system, which is what we're going to focus mostly on in this video, this section of the notes, you can see one single neuron is basically self-sufficient. It has its own myelin sheath created by these guys called Schwann cells, and there are no other cells located nearby doing any kind of helping. And here's another coronal section of the brain frontal view. Again, you can kind of see the difference between gray matter on the outside, the darker brown, and the white matter on the inside. Unmyelinated axons in the white matter versus myelinated axons in the gray matter. Alright, so here is a typical neuron of the peripheral nervous system. You'll see that it has a cell body, which is called the soma. And this is the typical cell parts. You can't see anything else in there, but this would have, well, you can see the nucleus. But it would also have ribosomes, mitochondria, and things that we should be used to seeing in a typical cell. But then it has this big long branch, which is the axon, and other branches kind of spitting out from it. These are the dendrites. These are receiving information. Dendrites are receiving information and giving it to the cell body. The axon is sending information. So the information comes in here on the dendrites and gets sent out on the axons. For the test, I will expect you to be able to know a little bit about this stuff. Something that you would have to locate could be any of these. Things that you would have to know functions of would be examples. Number 2 here and number 3 here would be things that you should know the functions of for the test, as well as location. So you might want to make a note of these things because there will be more that we're going to get to. So 2 and 3 on your notes are things you should also know the functions, not just locations. Continuing to number 4. And again, we're talking about the cell body for this part. Cytoplasm, another thing we would see inside, is full of what's called chromatophilic substance, which are basically kind of like rough ER, and they're in charge of protein synthesis. So this would be number 4, another thing that you would be expected to know function on the test. I would not ask you to locate these things. As you can see, they're super small and basically little tiny blobs, and it'd be pretty tough to locate them. So the only thing we would be responsible for on the test for number 4 would be function. You'll also see in there a nucleus with nucleolus, kind of easy stuff that I wouldn't ask you on the test at all. The axon arises from the axon hillock, which is just kind of a neck. That is the beginning of where the signal is getting sent. Number 6 are the collaterals, which are pretty typical nerves to have branches off the main branch, off the main axon. This is the axon collateral, or just collateral. And moving on to number 7, and these are only in the peripheral nervous system. Schwann cells, named after the scientist that discovered them. These cells, you can see right here is the cell, are creating this myelin sheath, which wraps around basically in spiral formation, going from the inside out, wrapping around this myelin sheath, and basically serving as an insulation for this electrical signal that's getting sent. And we'll see in the signal, the impulse getting sent, how exactly that works. But just keep in mind the reason for this, the benefit of this myelin sheath, is insulating the axon, much like insulation around a wire. So again, something that you would be should be able to identify its location, but also its function, its purpose of a Schwann cell, is to create the myelin sheath, which is insulating the axon. Number 8 is neurolemma. And we've kind of seen this in the muscle cell, the sarcolemma, the outermost portion of the Schwann cell, where the nucleus and cytoplasm are found. And again, this basically I would not ask you either or, location or function, but you should just know what it is, the outer portion of the Schwann cell. Number 9, the gaps between Schwann cells, which you can see here, are brown. The color of the nerve is kind of the orangey brown. Right in here are called the nodes of Ranvier, or singular would be a node of Ranvier, named after the scientist who discovered or first described them. And we'll see their significance more later on when we talk about the nerve impulse getting sent. But just to be able to locate them on the test, and function, which we will not cover entirely in this video. So here's another picture, a really good picture that shows you a lot, but if you can make sense out of all this, I'm not going to be asking you about all the parts of a cell. You've already covered that in biology, smooth ER, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, all stuff we're not going to talk about. So you can ignore those, but the rest of the stuff is stuff you should be able to recognize. Alright, next thing is nerve regeneration, which our bodies are capable only in the peripheral nervous system. So if a cell gets damaged, the axon, this big long branch, can be regenerated, and the way that it does this is actually by help from the Schwann cells, which are first going to basically be in charge of devouring the axon that has been damaged to a point, and then starting to regenerate the axon, regenerating more myelin, and then eventually that connection will be re-established with either another nerve or gland or muscle, wherever that is going. Keep in mind this nerve regeneration cannot take place on the central nervous system, because on the central nervous system there is no neurolemma, which is that outer covering of a Schwann cell, which, like I said, Schwann cells are responsible for this, have a large role in this process of nerve regeneration, which begins with breaking down damaged parts. Another important thing to recognize are these oligodendrocytes, which we saw in the central nervous system, actually inhibit regrowth. And to get a kind of better idea of how that might work, although I couldn't find much information on this, you can see how the oligodendrocytes are attached to multiple places on an axon, and even potentially many different axons, individual axons. And so if this thing is responsible for creating myelin on many different places, you can see how it might be kind of constricting if there was damage on this axon, and it is also doing work on this axon back here, which you can kind of barely see, how it might be constricting that regrowth. But in general, those Schwann cells are responsible for that regeneration of nerve, at least the axon portion of nerve tissue.